I thought I would start with a quotation from Stephen Lewis, who is one of my heroes in the economics world. And he says, in his recent comment, the official response to bank excesses appeared to have made little or no difference to the bank's eagerness to engage in really toxic business practices. It has merely prompted them to cut back on the kind of commercial lending that attracts a capital requirement. I think that's a very wise statement, and I think it was demonstrated by the fact that the banks could find $25 billion to allow BHP to go on its adventure in the potash business, but you try and find a bank to lend you £25,000 to start a business and produce some real employment, then even if you can get the money, they will gouge you to the point where basically they've stolen the equity. And I really think this is one of the great problems that we have. The banks should be there to serve the community rather than the other way about. And one of the reasons why we got into such a mess was that we forgot that. And I think we will be paying the price of that, price for that for some time. And one of the great ways to discourage people, of course, setting up businesses is to charge them usurious rates. And it was quite interesting that the governor last week, in his quarterly inflation report, made the point that the cost of borrowing to people who want to borrow, rather than the headline bank rate, has fallen 3 percentage points from its level before the banking crisis arose. That is their survey. So in other words, the banks are using the cheap money from the bank to recapitalize themselves, and nobody in what might be described as the real economy is getting any significant benefit. And I think that is a real stumbling block to growth. And I think that requires a complete change of mindset in the banks, for which I can see no evidence whatsoever. And I think that's very important. Another point that Mr. Lewis made recently, which I think is germane here, is that he said that it is emerging economies now that set prices. And they don't just set the prices of goods, increasingly they're setting the prices of labor as well. And this will have profound and far-reaching consequences, and we really don't know how to deal with that at the moment. And one of the, I submit, one of the consequences of this is the dramatic fall in our GDP from its peak, and the likely recovery along, at best, the same sort of growth trend line as we had before, but 11% below the position it would have been if we just carried on the same trend line. So we are in the middle of a painful adjustment, which I think has got some distance to run yet. What produces growth? I think we heard an admirable summary. It's the ability to make two blades of grass grow where one grew before. It's innovation. It's efficient markets. It is efficient communication of productivity and innovation gains so that they rapidly go through the economy. And I would say, if we're going to ask the government to what governments can do, I think the only thing that I would really urge them to spend serious money on is a high-speed mobile internet network, or to procure it to be spent by somebody else. I don't suppose many people here have the remotest grasp of what is going on in this space at the moment. I didn't until yesterday when I went to hear the editor of Wired magazine a high-tech magazine with the wrong title, but I'm not sure they're going to change it to wireless, because that doesn't sound quite right either. There are now websites where you can put up your own car for rental, and so that anybody who wants to borrow a car or rent a car can look around online and see what's on offer. And this is a business which is growing. There's a website called Waze, which uses the signals from your mobile telephone to judge the speed at which you're going and thus produce traffic information without any need for satellites, and really without any need for much of an intermediary to do it. There is a device which allows you to attach it to your mobile phone, so that when you take your mobile phone to your car boot sale, you can take somebody else's Barclay card and swipe it through, and that completely shuts out the banking intermediary there. It's just a straight transaction between the two accounts. And there are hundreds of things like this going on. And the best thing that I think that any outside agency can do is to ensure that the system can cope with the data demands which are put on it. I said I was going to be short. I'm not going to say very much more. I was asked to find 3 things that I would recommend the government do. That's the first. The second, which at the risk of stealing Luke's thunder, I would exempt all enterprises where the number of people is below a certain minimum, say 10 or 20, from all employment legislation, so that you have complete freedom of contract for people who are working for tiny firms. At present, one rogue employee can destroy a small business. You can argue about where to set the line and how to bring in the legislation as the firm grows, but I think that that principle is terribly important. And considering that these tiny enterprises are where the employment growth is going to come from, I would say that would make a big difference. The last thing is a bit of a hobby horse of mine. You may or may not be up to speed with Nest, a dreadful incubus which has been foisted upon us as a result of Adair Turner's pensions review. He wanted to call it the National Pension Savings Scheme, which I immediately dubbed Nat's Piss. And for reasons that I'm still puzzling about, they decided to change the name to the National Employment Savings Trust. This is going to make it's going to be a real horror story when it comes in next year and the year after. It is compulsory registration in pension scheme for every employer and every employee. And it will be a criminal offence for an employer to try and discourage an employee from opting into this scheme. And from the employee's point of view, it will look like another income tax. It will be a second national insurance payment. And it will be terribly damaging, because not only will it cut take-home pay at a time when people are going to be struggling, but it will also mean that they believe that by saving these penny packets from their pay slips, they will have a prosperous old age. And as we know, that is a delusion. But nobody's going to explain that to people. The Tories had a chance to scrap it, and they have, much to my horror, recently endorsed it. But it hasn't started yet, and it's still not too late for common sense to prevail. And if they did that and nothing else, I'd be a very happy bunny. Thanks.